Gaza, southern Palestine. This is the site of the ancient town of Rafia.
Hi, I'm Adam Moran. In 217 BCE, a great battle would take place here at Rafia between the two most powerful Alexandrian successor states. The Ptolemaic Kingdom and Seleucid Empire are at the height of their power, and the wars for control of Syria and the Levant have reached a climax. For roughly the span of 100 years, the region has been stricken with repeated wars and struggle that would forever change Hellenistic control of the Near East and bring two great empires to their knees.
Now prepare to witness the various battles and conflicts that took place during the 6 Syrian Wars as the Ptolemies and Seleucids battle for control of the region. See the vast numbers of soldiers, their formations, and the context and history of the engagements, now on Decisive Eras. To fully see how the region of Syria was plunged into chaos, we must go back over a century before Rafia. Following the death of Alexander the Great, his vast empire was left with no true heir. It didn't take long for conflict to begin, and the 4 wars of the Diadochi would be fought, leaving the empire permanently divided. By the end of the wars, Ptolemy I would rule over Egypt, and adopted many old pharaonic practices and traditions in hopes of maintaining control, as well as claiming dominion over the Syrian region. However, Syria had actually been promised to Ptolemy's ally, Seleucus. Not wanting to start another war, and as a gesture of goodwill to Ptolemy for his aid in the past, Seleucus did not take military action, and the two kingdoms remained at peace.
The peace would be short-lived, however. After the death of Ptolemy and Seleucus, their successors would show little interest in maintaining any kind of peace.
Less than 3 decades later, the new ruler of the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus I, was keen on expanding his territory into Syria and Anatolia. Ptolemy II, however, stood in his way. He had proved to be a powerful leader, as well as a skilled general, and was prepared to defend his territory. Thus began the First Syrian War in 274 BCE. The Seleucids found initial success by quickly conquering land along the coast of Syria and Anatolia. The Ptolemies had been taken off guard. However, Ptolemy II was quick to respond. Due to a combination of diplomacy and skilled tactics, he was able to retake all lost territories, as well as expand deeper into Seleucid Anatolia by 271 BCE. The Seleucids were forced to make peace to prevent further territorial losses. However, while the war in Syria and Anatolia had gone well for Ptolemy II, issues domestically began to emerge. During the war, Ptolemy's half-brother, Magas, had declared Cyrenaica independent and would remain a thorn in the Ptolemaic kingdom's side for 2 decades.
Unfortunately for Ptolemy II, he was unable to quickly respond to this large-scale revolt in Libya. Only 10 years after the first conflict, the Seleucid Empire had a new ruler and was already preparing for its next campaign.
Antiochus I's successor, Antiochus II, was intent on regaining the lands his father had lost. He allied his empire with another successor kingdom, Antigonid Macedon, to defeat the still-ruling Ptolemy II in 261 BCE. The Seleucid Empire would quickly gain the upper hand. In the first year of the war, an Antigonid fleet would meet the Ptolemies at the Battle of Kos, where they would win a great victory. The Seleucids were able to quickly and severely weaken Egypt's navy, as well as gain large amounts of land. Eventually, Macedon had to withdraw its military support in an effort to deal with rebellions and frontier incursions back home, which may have been instigated by Ptolemy II to weaken the strength of the invaders. This strategy seemed to work, at least somewhat, as in 253 BCE, Antiochus II married Ptolemy II's daughter, Berenice Syra, ending the Second Syrian War.
With peace restored, Ptolemy quickly looked to deal with Cyrenaica. which he reabsorbed the Ptolemaic kingdom in 250 BCE. Not long after, however, in 246 BCE, Ptolemy II's reign would come to an end.
Soon afterward, both Antiochus II and Ptolemy II would die in 246 BCE, which would be the impetus for the Third Syrian War. Antiochus II's death left a power struggle between two contenders, his previous wife, Laodice, who may have actually poisoned Antiochus, and his current wife, Berenice Syra, the daughter of Ptolemy II. While the two struggled to put their respective sons on the throne, Berenice would request aid from her brother, the new Ptolemaic king, Ptolemy III. Sensing an opportunity, Ptolemy III marched to Antioch. However, when he arrived, he would find that Laodice had already assassinated Berenice and her son. Laodice now placed her son on the throne and crowned him Seleucus II. This deeply angered Ptolemy III, who declared war on Seleucus in 246 BCE. The tables had turned, as now the Seleucids were on the defensive. Unprepared for a large war, Seleucus II's forces faced many setbacks, as Ptolemy III successfully campaigned into Syria. Ptolemaic forces were also aided by the leadership of a ruthless Spartan mercenary named Xanthippus, who had been hired by Ptolemy III. The Seleucid Empire seemed to be on the brink of collapse, as they lost territory across Syria and Anatolia. By the end of the war's first year, Ptolemaic forces would capture the Seleucid capital of Antioch. To make matters worse, Ptolemy III was already marching towards Babylon, which he would capture by 246 BCE, leading to a Parthian revolt against the Seleucids. Seleucus II set out to rectify the situation. In 245 BCE, Seleucid forces would drive out Ptolemy and recapture Babylon. Ptolemy III would face a major setback when Antigonid Macedon entered the war on the side of the Seleucids. At the Battle of Andros in 245 BCE, the Antigonid fleet would defeat the numerically superior Ptolemaic fleet in another large naval battle. The Antigonids would now gain control of the Cyclades Islands. However, as the balance of power seemed to be shifting towards Seleucus II, he would face a major internal crisis. At the request of his mother, Seleucus had granted control of Anatolia to his brother, Antiochus Hyrax. Hyrax would promptly revolt against his brother, undermining Seleucus' war effort against Ptolemy III for the next 3 years. With the situation degrading, Seleucus II sued for peace in 241 BCE, and granted even more land to Ptolemy III as part of the agreement. The Ptolemaic kingdom, led by Ptolemy III, was now at the peak of their power and influence. After around 2 decades, the throne of the Seleucid Empire eventually passed to Antiochus III in 223 BCE, who sought to reclaim all lost imperial territory that had been held since Seleucus I. In 221 BCE, Antiochus would re-establish Seleucid control of Media and Persia, which had been in revolt. With the rebellion crushed, he now turned his eyes to Syria and Egypt. The Ptolemaic kingdom had been weakened after the death of Ptolemy III. A power struggle resulted in the death of the Queen Mother Berenice II, and the Ptolemaic court placed Ptolemy IV on the throne and sought to control the young ruler. Antiochus III saw this as the perfect opportunity, and after being delayed for 2 years, finally began his campaign into Syria in 219 BCE, starting the Fourth Syrian War. He would quickly capture the port of Antioch, as well as Phoenicia and Tyre. However, Antiochus III chose to consolidate his forces and territorial gains rather than promptly invade Egypt. This bought time for the Ptolemies, who began to prepare a large army as well. In 217 BCE, the long-delayed battle came to a head as Ptolemy IV marched his army to meet Antiochus III on the sandy plain of Rafia.
In 217 BCE, Ptolemy IV and Antiochus III would face off at Rafia in the largest Hellenistic battle since Ipsus nearly 80 years before. Close to 150,000 men would fight to decide who would control Syria-Palestine.
Ptolemy IV commanded roughly 75,000 men, including 5,000 cavalry, 70,000 infantry, over half of which were trained in the Macedonian phalanx, and 73 war elephants. Antiochus III led an army of similar size at 68,000 men, including 6,000 cavalry, 62,000 infantry, and 102 elephants. The two armies deployed their troops similarly and faced off against each other. Phalanx infantry was concentrated primarily in the center, with the war elephants and skirmishers positioned in front of the infantry on either flank. Both sides split their cavalry and placed them on the wings of their army. Ptolemy would command from his left wing, and Antiochus would command from his right. Both sides charged both flanks of their elephants. However, the larger Seleucid Indian elephants sent the smaller Ptolemaic African elephants into a panic. As they retreated, they caused disorder in the Ptolemaic ranks. Antiochus III led his right-wing cavalry into the Ptolemaic left wing, which were overwhelmed, forcing the Ptolemaic left back. The two armies' phalanxes now collided in full battle. Ptolemy IV would ride to the center of his phalanx to encourage his men in the attack. Fortunately for the Ptolemies, the Seleucid elephants on the left flank refused to advance, perhaps scared by the noise of battle. Taking advantage of this weakness, the Ptolemaic cavalry moved around the elephants, attacking the Seleucid flank. The Ptolemaic phalanx now drove back the Seleucid phalanx, which began to retreat. At the same time, Antiochus III chased the retreating troops on the Ptolemaic left, believing he had won the battle, and the Ptolemaic army was in full retreat. Antiochus III would soon realize his mistake. He attempted to lead his cavalry back around to attack the Ptolemaic rear, but it was too late, and the battle had ended. Ptolemy IV defeated Antiochus III and forced him to retreat to a nearby city. While Antiochus III hoped to regroup for another attack, his troops refused, and so he was forced to call a truce with Ptolemy. The Battle of Rafia, the largest battle of the Syrian Wars, was won for the Ptolemaic kingdom by Ptolemy IV. Thus ended the Fourth Syrian War.
The Ptolemies would win a stunning victory over the Seleucids and cause massive casualties. Antiochus III had been dealt a major setback, and Syria-Palestine would fall into Ptolemaic hands.
Despite the victory, Ptolemy IV declined to advance any further to recapture Antioch. The Ptolemaic kingdom continued to weaken as they faced economic issues and rebellion. Eventually, this culminated in a large nativist Egyptian revolt. Emboldened by their performance at Rafia and their level of training, Upper Egypt fell back into native hands for the first time in centuries. The native pharaoh, Horwennefer, captured Thebes in the last years of Ptolemy IV's reign in 205 BCE. The next year, Ptolemy IV would die, leading to a long and bloody fight for who would gain regency over his successor, Ptolemy V, who was only a child. With the native Egyptians threatening their borders, and regency switching hands constantly, the Ptolemaic state was near anarchy. At long last, Antiochus III had his chance. In 202 BCE, he began his second invasion of Syria and started the Fifth Syrian War. Promising territories in Asia Minor, the Seleucid Empire would gain support of Macedon, led by Philip V. These events would eventually lead to Roman intervention. For the time being, however, the Seleucids were able to regain vast amounts of land. Despite being halted at Gaza once again, Antiochus III would deliver a crushing blow to the Ptolemies at the Battle of Pania, near the River Jordan.
In what was likely the last large-scale open battle between the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic kingdom, Antiochus III would lead a great army against Ptolemy V at Pania. Roughly 120,000 soldiers would face off in Syria for one last great battle.
Antiochus III would lead roughly 70,000 men against the 53,000 of Ptolemy V. As their armies faced off, Antiochus would make the first move. His elite cavalry would crush their Ptolemaic opposition, which routed. The two phalanxes now met in the center, and the Ptolemies initially gained the upper hand. However, as they began to push back the Seleucid center, elephants would halt their advance. This bought enough time for the Seleucid cavalry to flank around and crash into the rear of the Ptolemaic army, causing massive casualties. The Ptolemaic phalanx was nearly annihilated, and what was left of the army routed. This allowed Antiochus III to gain control of Syria and open the way to Egypt. This, however, would disrupt Rome's grain trade with the Ptolemaic kingdom, so the Republic sent emissaries to the rulers warning them not to invade Egypt. Antiochus had not actually planned on invading Egypt in this campaign, and so willingly complied with Rome's demands. Rather, they contented themselves by raiding Ptolemaic holdings and coastlines. Ptolemy V would face even more problems, as native Upper Egypt would gain the support of the Egyptian priests, increasing their strength and causing revolts across the kingdom. Still undergoing crippling domestic issues, in 195 BCE, Ptolemy V had little choice but to agree to let Antiochus III keep his newly acquired territory, in exchange for his daughter, Cleopatra I's, hand in marriage. With the war over, Ptolemy V worked to put down the nativist Egyptian revolt, and would regain control of Upper Egypt in 185 BCE, thus ending native Egyptian rule once more for centuries. By this point, both kingdoms were in a severely weakened state. By the end of Antiochus III's reign, the Seleucid Empire had lost a war with Rome and had to pay large sums to the victor, as well as being engaged in a conflict with the Parthian Empire. At the same time, Egypt was still undergoing internal struggles, not helped by the sudden death of Ptolemy V. Cleopatra I's son, Ptolemy VI, was installed as king, despite still being a child. He didn't lead alone though, as he shared rule with his sister, Cleopatra II, who he had married, one of many old pharaonic traditions continued by the Ptolemies. Further, Ptolemy VI's younger brother, Ptolemy VII, was also named as co-ruler, meaning that Egypt's official rulers were all no more than children. As the next decade passed, both kingdoms saw war with one another as inevitable, with each going to Rome in hopes of gaining their support. Both, however, were denied. In 170 BCE, the Ptolemaic regents declared war on the Seleucids, now led by Antiochus IV, hoping it would be a way to unify the fractured country against a common enemy. And thus began the Sixth Syrian War. Taken off guard at the capabilities of the Seleucids, the Ptolemies quickly suffered defeat after defeat, eventually losing the important trade town of Pelusium, throwing the future of Egypt into question and the kingdom into disarray. By 168 BCE, Cyprus had been captured by a Seleucid fleet, and Antiochus IV regrouped to take the whole Ptolemaic kingdom, but was threatened by Rome, who once again forbade the leader from taking Egypt. Initially asking for time to consider, the Roman emissary drew a circle around Antiochus IV in the sand, and told him that he could not leave the circle until he had made a decision. Though enraged and humiliated, Antiochus IV had little choice but to comply, ending any hopes of capturing Egypt. By 168 BCE, the sixth and final Syrian War was over.
The Ptolemaic Kingdom and Seleucid Empire had fought each other for close to a century over the lands of Syria, Palestine, and Anatolia, and with little to show for it. Both former superpowers had been reduced to a fraction of their former strength, and neither would ever recover from their endless wars.
Both kingdoms would continue to fight each other in future conflicts, and by the end of a long string of wars, both combatants were severely weakened and susceptible to attack. The Six Syrian Wars had left the two largest Hellenistic kingdoms as a shell of their once great power. Their deterioration was so great that not long after, the Seleucid Empire would collapse entirely, leaving Ptolemaic Egypt as the last successor kingdom, before Egypt's eventual integration into the new power of Rome.